that's where you went to get healed, is to somebody like a miracle worker. So Jesus as a miracle worker is a reflection to me of a cosmology, an ancient cosmology. It says nothing unique about the nature of who Jesus was. So I'm able to put into context that Jesus, even his miracles, are part of a cosmological worldview that doesn't apply to me anymore. So that's step number one. Step number two is, and Lori has helped me with this one, I don't know that we fully understand the nature of reality. So I want to keep an open window to the mystery that might exist in what it means to be human, what it means to be the creation. And that's where I leave some wiggle room. So I still leave a little bit of openness to the unknown in my life, because we get biased by scientific thinking that we can figure everything out, and then that's just the way it is. And then next thing you know, I'm caught off guard. I'm like, well, that scientific thinking I have to throw out the window, because that doesn't always manage the situation. So I think you're right in that you want to take something from each of these perspectives so that you can behave accordingly in our time. And the question is, for you personally, what are you going to take out of the cosmology of the ancients, based on what you know of the story? What are you going to take out of the historical context of Jesus and his place, or Paul and his place, to bring forward into how you're going to act? That's partly your responsibility to do that. And I would say one of the reasons why I'm bringing this up is because when we use the language, or have been paying attention to this notion of reconciling in Christ, that RIC language I've been using, reconciling in Christ is a way of trying to pay attention to these two pieces and saying, well, how do we bring reconciliation to situations in our time and place, in our communities, where we live? And so it's trying to take the power of reconciliation that seemed present in both the cosmology, as Jesus heals, if you will, miraculous healings, or heals the creation, out of the historical context, as Jesus connects with people who are ostracized in that society, tries to bring them back into connection with the community. Both of those pieces can be a challenge for us of how we do reconciliation today. And I think that's where we're going to kind of go in the next few sessions together. Okay? I sort of want to lay this out for you because I think this is not as clean as it could be, because it's tricky to just draw inferences from Jesus' time and place and then apply them to today. It's just really hard to do. And that's been the challenge, those of you in the Mark class, right? That's been the big question of how do we take Mark's perspective of Jesus and bring it into today? It's not always easy to do. Right, any other questions?
Dan? Yeah.
Comments? Yeah.
What relevance does Jesus have for today then?
Yeah.
I mean, we've wiped him out, basically.
We really have, haven't we, bud?
Yeah. Thanks anyway.
I mean, that's a good question. I wonder that myself weekly. Why are we making such a big hubbub about this whole Jesus character? If we've wiped out his divine status because we realize that's a cosmological framework, right? We're not hanging on to that. I mean, you might be still, but many scholars have gone, look, Jesus was not a divine person as you might understand it. That was a cosmological way of talking about how amazing he was. So we wiped out much of his divinity. And then we look at his historical context and go, well, that was such a different time and place, but we can't hardly apply that. So what's left? What's the baby? If this is all bathwater, what baby is left over for us as Christians? But you got an answer?
No. So, but if we use the phrase reconciled in Christ,
right?
I take that to mean that the Christ has an important place in our reconciliation. That's where we get reconciled.
Okay.
He's the one who molds us together, so to speak.
Yeah.
The welding, arc welder, if you will.
Well, that's a good way of thinking about it. And I'd go two tracks. One would be a little bit down that line, and that is using the idea of the Christ rather than the Jesus, right? So what Paul did quickly was shift from the story. Paul didn't tell you much about the story of the historical Jesus in his writings, and he was the first writer. He leaped very quickly to the Christ image, right? We are one in Christ, he would say. And the Christ is this sort of almost a mystical term of living in the body of the Christ. And that the church self-identified as being the body of the Christ. And so to some degree, you could see the Jesus of history stimulating a perspective that we, if we live into this life of Jesus, we are the Jesus alive today. We are the little Christ community that is today. So in some ways I could stick with that. That might be one approach, is to say, well, Jesus is at the heart of what it means to be the Christ today, to be the mystical Christ. And then that opens you up to all sorts of how are you in touch with that mystical Christ, how do we ground that mystical Christ into the life of Jesus, so you can find your way back to Jesus maybe through the mystical Christ, is what I'm implying. That's one idea. And the other one, I would have remembered if I had had more sleep. Because I was in my head a minute ago and now it's gone.
I'll ask you next week.
Yeah. But I think Bud is absolutely right. For most of you, being a Christian is getting harder and harder and harder to do, and more exciting all at the same time. Because it requires a deconstruction, oftentimes, of concepts that you've had in your head that you presume to be normative, that have been and are continuing to be challenged by people who are really, that you pay to do work in this area, our scholars and that sort of thing. And we're having to come to grips with that. That's wave number one. Wave number two is the world's not getting any less complicated, and the problems in the world are not getting any less complicated. So how can I approach them out from my faith tradition? That's the second great challenge, I think. All right, and the second one is, I think, maybe what Bud brought up, and this whole notion of what does it mean to participate, what some would call become ambassadors of reconciliation. That just like you think in terms of Jesus and the place of the mystical Christ holds for Paul, Paul would also say that not only are we reconciled within Jesus, the Christ, but we are ambassadors of reconciliation for one another and for the world. And this text that I handed out for you today is probably one of the key texts that really, for the people in Corinth, captures Paul's understanding of what it means to be people who are participating in the ongoing reconciling work of God. So we're going to use this text, and I've written some notes in here so you can kind of follow along today to try to get a grip on that. So does everybody have this handout? Looks like? All right. So let's just start. Let's read together, and then I'm going to pause us. So let's read the first verse together, verse 16. From now on, therefore, we regard no one from a human point of view. Even though we once knew Christ from a human point of view, we know him no longer in that way. All right, let's hold there. So two things there. One, you heard me talking about how Paul went quickly from Jesus, the human, to the Christ. You see this in his own writing, right? We used to know Jesus as a human, but now this Jesus, almost the spirit of Jesus, is this Christ. So we've shifted Jesus to the Christ. But the human point of view, you've got to, for Paul in particular, it's like the way everybody sees the world. So you want to frame that as like a worldview. So from now on, we regard no one from the old worldview anymore. We're going to look at everybody now through the eyes of the Christ. So Paul is really shifting people because he's confronting a worldview that the people of Corinth have confronted for a long time, and trying to help them to see not just that this system is one that does evil in the world, that's clearly Paul would, I think of that, but that there's another way forward. That if we can imagine the world not from our human point of view, if we could somehow open ourselves to see the world from the viewpoint of the Christ, it will transform the way in which we both view each other and behave towards one another. So that's what Paul is pushing for in this kind of notion. So let's keep going. Let's go 17 and 18. So if anyone is in Christ, there is a new creation.